I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. It's February 25th, 2025. President Trump has indicated that he would like to take over DC more and is mulling over an executive order to do so. Under a new law, DC's Attorney General sues three Maryland drivers with more than $90,000 in unpaid tickets. Meanwhile, Maryland is considering a pilot project to enforce cell phone use ban by drivers. Bob Atchison goes to the Supreme Court. Who? And for what? And the bizarre case of World War I chemical weapons debris in a Northeast DC neighborhood. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program. If your goal is to make a meaningful impact with a career in local, state, or federal government, discover what this degree can do for you. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. area composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. She has composed music across several genres, including orchestral, choral, electronica, and stage and video, including this piece, Second Nature, which was commissioned by the Baltimore Dance Project and choreographed by Doug Hamby. You can find her work at annarubinmusic.com. If you get pulled over and get a ticket in another state, that ticket will be collected. May take time, but if you don't pay up, the state where you got your driver's license can suspend your driving privileges. This is the Non-Resident Violators Compact from 1965, which enables reciprocal ticket enforcement between states and is particularly useful in multi-jurisdictional metropolitan areas such as Washington, D.C., where two states and one city-state, the District of Columbia, meet. Residents who live here are constantly crossing and recrossing boundaries, sometimes many times a day. But the 1965 Compact has not kept up with technology. Camera tickets are not covered, and parking tickets are not always covered. So while a police officer issued ticket will be enforced in another state, camera tickets and parking tickets will not. With the consequence that many drivers have racked up tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid tickets out of state. The D.C. Council, going back to 2015 and then again in 2020-21, tried to get a three-way agreement between the District, Maryland, and Virginia, but for reasons still unclear to me, this has not happened. I've heard general criticism of camera tickets as targeting low-income folks, targeting locations where signage is unclear, or where speed traps are set. While the suburban Maryland counties have since vastly expanded camera-based traffic enforcement and possibly might be more sympathetic to a new reciprocal camera ticket enforcement agreement. Traffic cameras in Virginia are fewer, installed mainly in school zones and roadwork locations. A new D.C. law passed last fall, 2024, called the STEER Act, has allowed D.C. to file civil lawsuits against ticket scofflaws from other states, and D.C. Attorney General Brian Schaub acted last week to file complaints against three Maryland residents. Earl D. Curtis owes $27,000 in tickets to D.C. for 115 traffic violations, including 52 for speeding. On September 9, 2024, he struck a 12-year-old child, causing foot fracture. Leon L. Carter owes $30,000 for 84 traffic infractions, 80 of them for speeding. Andre E. Bowman owes $36,000 for 135 traffic infractions, including 94 for speeding. Meanwhile, the Maryland General Assembly is considering a bill to allow Montgomery and Prince George's counties to use cameras to enforce the ban on handheld devices while driving. Senator Jeff Wallstreicher is one of the bill's sponsors.
Yes, I've had a demonstration of the technology, and the technology has moved incredibly forward in the past few years, and privacy concerns are addressed. So I think this is ready for prime time. But before we bring it statewide, Senator Mike Jackson, who is the leading sponsor of the bill, and I decided we would pilot it in our local counties. There are multiple companies that are in this space, and each of them takes the photo slightly differently. But most of them have a photo of the driver inside the vehicle utilizing their handheld device. The content on the handheld device is then blurred out, and then the person's face is also blurred out. The photos are pretty convincing, no question about it.
Where will the uncured pictures be in your bill? Will it be with the vendor? Will it be with the state agency?
The cameras automatically are doing the privacy blurring. And so there's no underlying photo without the blur. The blur is done in camera. The owner is the Montgomery County Police Department, just as the photos for speed enforcement are owned by the Montgomery County Police Department.
There are certain conditions under which you are allowed to use your cell phone.
The exceptions aren't in the bill. The exceptions are in current law. So, for example, dialing 911 would count as an exception to the current law.
If I were in my car and I was dialing 911, the camera taking my picture with the phone in hand would not know that I was dialing 911.
That's correct.
The burden of proof thereafter is on me to show that I was actually dialing 911.
In that circumstance, you would contest the ticket and indicate that you fell under one of the exceptions. For all practical purposes, self-attestation under one of the exceptions would be accepted, and the ticket would be dismissed very quickly.
But does your law allow self-attestation?
So that's a conversation that we're having. So the bill is moving through the legislative process. Lots of folks have identified the very issues that you've identified, which is there are exceptions under current law, and the cameras can't catch those exceptions. And so we're working through the legislative process as to how to account for that. At the end of the day, this is a pilot program. And so the whole point of the pilot program is to explore the very issues that you've identified.
What we have seen in almost all camera programs is that despite our best efforts, they end up disproportionately affecting people that are least capable of dealing with the system. Should they get a ticket and they were in fact on a 911 call, they may not know enough to be able to do all the necessary things in order to get the ticket struck. And so we see this with, school bus cameras. We see this with traffic cameras. Your Maryland General Assembly.
So this is a balance we have to strike under current law. Nothing about the proposed law changes that.
Senator Jeff Wallstreicher, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sunil.
Bob Atchison is a 75-year-old environmental engineer from Vermont who on October 22, 2022, stopped rush hour traffic on I-395 in Washington, D.C. Atchison was using time-honored disruptive tactics to bring attention to a cause he believes in, climate change. He wanted then President Biden to declare a climate emergency and to change U.S. policies accordingly. He was arrested and convicted, but is now appealing his conviction to the highest court in the land.
I've probably been an environmental activist since the days of Rachel Carson in the 70s. I was glad to see that Jimmy Carter had solar panels installed on the White House by a friend of mine from a little bit south of here in Randolph, Vermont. Then Reagan moves into the White House and has them taken down. Our ask was to, as declare emergency, was to ask President of the United States, Joe Biden at the time, to declare a climate emergency and act as if there was one.
You were arrested, as you probably expected you would be, and then you were tried in DC courts, where they did not allow you to present your climate action defense. So it's called the necessity defense, and that's what you wanted to use, but they didn't let you, right?
Right. They didn't even let me get into court to ask for that. They denied the motion flat out before we got into court.
And what did they sentence you?
5 days or 7 days, all suspended, and also 9 months of probation.
And now you are appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court on the basis that you were not allowed to present your full defense.
That's true. The appeals have been going on since February of 2023.
Is your primary objective here to use your arrest to publicize the cause that you had when you stopped the traffic?
That's certainly at the driving point behind all of this, is that it seems that the average U.S. citizen, I think I heard something like 60 to 70% believe that there is a climate change that's causing natural or actually unnatural disasters around the country. However, it's just really seems very hard to motivate people to take action. And it's whether they're waiting for the white knight and the silver bullet, or whether they're waiting for somebody else to do it, it just isn't going to work that way. People have to sacrifice, people have to consume less, people have to get together in communities and work on the problem.
You've clearly sacrificed by taking action, by being arrested, by going through this entire process. But you're right. There isn't an awareness of environmentalism in the general population that leads many, many, many thousands, perhaps, of people to do the same thing as you are. Have you thought about why that is the case?
It's maybe fear leading to denial, or like tomorrow, or maybe the day after that, or maybe I'll do something else about it then. And I don't know.
Is that fear or is it laziness?
It's a hard question to figure out. You know, if it's not in your backyard, you know, for example, in my small town of Plainfield, Vermont, we had a devastating flood. We have a population of 1,400 people here, and we now have, I think, 45 properties that are declared uninhabitable and are going to be bought out by FEMA and destroyed. This is one brook.
Your old town of Plainfield, Vermont?
Yeah.
Would everybody do the same thing as you are doing?
To be in the streets and sitting, that might be a little bit out of the realm of what some people can do, but they are certainly fired up and ready to be active in a way that they might not have been before.
Will blocking roads achieve that purpose?
I act knowingly that I'm breaking the law in the intent of drawing an attention to the greater crime that the fossil fuel companies and their banks and insurers are causing to civilization on a whole.
Bob Atchison, good luck in the Supreme Court.
Well, thank you.
Fourth Circle Parks in Northeast DC, which is a National Park Service property close to the Fort Totten Metro. There have been remnants of World War I chemical weapons. Local resident and former ANC Commissioner Zach Emmerman ran the trail back.
During World War I, in the American University area, in what is now Spring Valley, which at the time it was just, as far as I understand, it was just empty fields at the time, the American University and I believe the Department of Defense as well were building, testing and making chemical weapons in that area. At the time, they didn't have quite the same standards for getting rid of these sorts of things as we do now. And apparently they just buried them in giant pits throughout kind of that area. And for people that have been following DC history for a while, this was a huge, massive story in the 90s and early 2000s because there was a huge cleanup. It cost almost $300 million to clean up. They spent 20 odd years cleaning it up. About 1 year before they uncovered that, we know that at least 4 dump truckloads of soil were taken from a site, which we know was one of the sites that was contaminated by these chemical weapons in Spring Valley. And at least one of those loads ended up in the soil in the park over here. July of 1992, I believe, it has been in the park here. They injured workers when they took it out of the soil in Spring Valley. People fled to the site on foot because the fumes were coming out of it were so toxic, ran away. They had to be hospitalized. One of the workers had lesions on his skin that a DC health report said was consistent with exposure to a chemical weapon, and it specifically cited lewisite, which is known as the dew of death. The contractors at the time had a problem, though. They had at least 4 dump truckloads of soil that had come out of there that they knew were toxic. Their problem was what to do with it. They initially tried to bring it to a dump in Lorton, Virginia, where the dump itself said, no, this soil is too toxic. We won't take it. This was all around May 1992. Going back even a little bit further, in the 80s, they had originally planned to when they were initially talking about building the Green Line out from Fort Totten to Greenbelt, they initially planned to build it at surface level, which would have cut neighborhoods in part and on the DC side. So people protested, I think, for good reason. And the plan was modified to instead build it in a very shallow trench through this area. And then after it crossed the Maryland border, it was going to go up and be elevated, which is the way it is today. They dug the soil out, built a tunnel through, very shallow trench, and then it required a lot of soil to put it back on top to restore the landscape after that. And that's where they needed the soil. And right around the same time, you had these people across town who couldn't get rid of it. A bunch of toxic soil, didn't know what to do with it, and couldn't get rid of it. And somebody must have told them, hey, there's a site over here that needs a whole bunch of soil. By July, we know possibly more, but at least one load ended up here. And when they brought it here, started working with the soil, somebody working with the bulldozer fell unconscious and had to be carried off the site. They found bottles were falling out of it, glass vials and things were in the soil, and the National Park Service person on site ordered the soil removed. And that's where we officially lose track of where the soil went, because they just ordered it removed and then it, I guess, disappeared into the ether. Who knows? Officially, and they have claimed for years until recently that the soil left and it was gone. However, we keep finding chemical weapons in this park, like way far away from where they were working with the soil originally. They were doing a landscape restoration project over several acres of the park here at the exact same time. That's why the soil was brought here originally. And in those spots, we have found chemical weapons.
How large is the park?
It's a long, thin strip of park that goes from west of the Fort Totten Metro. There's a big clump of park, and it goes a very thin band all the way to the Maryland border across.
How far away from the head are you seeing the vials and the testing, and where is the poisoning?
In 2020, they found a World War I era military ordnance modified for use as a chemical weapon. That is, I believe, a direct quote from a National Park Service report. The staging area where they brought the soil and where it was ordered removed is half a mile to the east of there, so just east of the Fort Totten Metro Station today. In 2023, they found an additional 2 canisters that these are called Livens projectors. This is something that was used to shoot chemical weapons behind enemy lines in World War I, and then they would explode and disperse chemical weapons and kill a whole bunch of people. We found 2 of those well to the west. Luckily, so far, none of these things have been dangerous. They've been analyzed. They were determined to not have any active chemical weapons in them. But I think the reason could be that they've leached into the soil. The Livens, the 2 projectors that were found to the west of the staging area, had liquids in them. They've been there for 35 years. So we know in the Spring Valley area, a lot of the stuff, they would find like canisters and stuff. They found some that were active in the Spring Valley area that were still dangerous. But a lot of the stuff had leached out into the soil and was actually active in the soil. For people that are unfamiliar with the park, it's not particularly developed. It's heavily wooded. The National Park Service doesn't do a whole lot with it. There's not really a reason for people to be digging around in there. But when in 2020 was one of the few times that they had dug around in there. And the moment they dug, they found a World War I era military weapon.
Have private landowners around the park found any?
No, not to my knowledge, no.
Who uses the park mostly?
The area where the weapon was found in 2020 is where they're building a trail to cross in between North Michigan Park and Riggs Park. It is a primary crossing point for people going to the metro. Probably hundreds of people that use it every day, maybe in thousands going back and forth there. Near the WMATA staging site, which is just to the west of the metro, there is a community garden.
Any complaints from the gardeners?
Not to my knowledge, because I don't think there's any reason for people to be concerned just walking through the park at all. Okay. The Metropolitan Branch Trail goes right through. I bike on it all the time. However, the National Park Service has done 2 rounds of very narrow testing in very limited areas. They weren't super concerned about it because it wasn't used that often because these are wooded areas. However, you have to keep in mind that we don't know the full extent of it, and we need to do more testing. The National Park Service has recently said that they are looking for funding to do more extensive testing of the park. They have not yet found that funding, and I would ask them to maybe light a fire under them a little bit to get the funding.
Your hope is that the Trump administration, that does not generally like the National Park Service, will give it money to go testing for World War I poison in the soil out near your home.
I am not going to say I'm hopeful at all, given the current occupant of the White House.
Zach Ammerman, thank you for taking the time. Good luck.
Thank you.
President Trump has been publicly musing about asserting more direct control over DC. Unlike Canada and Greenland, he can do more on DC. He is said to be mulling over an executive order to reduce crime and beautify the city, especially for visiting foreign dignitaries. DC has enjoyed home rule and elected mayor and council since 1973. But Congress has the power to remove or amend DC's home rule. Not a threat Mayor Muriel Bowser takes lightly. Publicly, she has spoken constructively about things she can do together with President Trump. Most importantly, to bring federal workers back to downtown DC. One-time DCPS teacher and the voice of chart-topping song Killing Me Softly, the famous Roberta Flack, died February 24th. Flack went to Howard University and stayed in the city for a while. She was 88. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Washington, D.C. area composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. The piece from which we have excerpted music for this episode is called Second Nature and was commissioned by the Baltimore Dance Project. You can find her work at annarubinmusic.com. If you want to share your music on this show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.